Hello, everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on rashpixel.fm. I'm Pete Wright, and right over there is Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, Pete Wright.
How you doing, Nikki Kinzer?
I'm doing good on this rainy day.
It is a rainy day, but we are warmed by the light of ADHD Awareness Month.
Yes, we are. That's a great way to put it.
That's right. It is the warm glow that ignites our passions. It's very exciting. We're right in the middle of it as we record this. What's the latest news?
You know, nothing new from what we've talked about in the last couple of weeks. I just encourage people to go check out the website, and on that front page, courtesy of your work, Pete, you'll see all of the different events that are coming up. Absolutely. Calendar's right there. Just scroll down just a hair. You'll see the row of events coming up. Make sure to check out, join Nikki for the Facebook Live events each Friday. Another one coming up this week. So we're very excited about that. Yes.
You know, we're talking about the puzzle that is ADHD treatment, and this is a really good follow-up to our conversation last week. You know, new to ADHD, like what now? What do I do now? Well, this is kind of chapter 2, and we have a fantastic guest who's going to help us with that. Before we dig in, head over to takecontroladhd.com, get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there for free on the website, or subscribe to our mailing list to get it delivered to your inbox each week. You can connect with us on Twitter or Facebook at Take Control ADHD, and call us at 503-664-4ADD. That's 503-664-4ADD to get your thoughts and questions on the show. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget, we are actually on Patreon, patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. We thank everybody who's come in and supported us already with $1 or a few bucks a month to support the work and interviews and investigations that we've been doing for years now. Patreon's new to us. And so if you've gotten something out of the show and it's changed your life in some small way, we appreciate you helping us to continue to grow by supporting us on Patreon. Again, patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. Okay, our guest today is Laurie Dupar. She is a senior certified ADHD coach and psychiatric nurse practitioner. It's been a while since we talked with Laurie, way back on episode 238, when she helped us unpack the subject of medication and the ADHD brain. Today, Laurie is back to help us put together the puzzle that is ADHD treatment. Laurie, welcome back to the ADHD podcast.
I am excited to be here, Pete and Nikki. Thank you for having me back. It's been a while.
It's been a long time.
And thank you for having me during ADHD Awareness Month. As you were talking about, you know, we're basking in the glow, right? I think it's an orange ribbon, isn't it, that we have? So we're basking in the orange ribbon glow of ADHD Awareness Month. So
it's hot. The ribbon is hot. It's actually hot this month.
Yes.
It's hot.
That's right. That's right. Well, and it is such an important month to talk about ADHD. And it doesn't really matter if you've been newly diagnosed or if you've known about your diagnosis for a long time. What I've noticed is that, you know, life changes for people. We go into different chapters, different transitions, and ADHD may look different for you at different times, depending on what's going on in your life. And I thought today it would be great to have you come on and help us talk about how to navigate that, you know, their ADHD, depending on where they are right now. How do you adapt that to where they are now? And I thought a great place to start would be medication, because this is your expertise, or one of your expertise is definitely about medication. I think, you know, most of the experiences that I've seen with clients is that's like the first treatment, right? They get the diagnosis and then the doctor immediately wants to talk about medication.
Yeah, it is. It's the, I think it's also, I think, what prevents people, honestly, from getting a diagnosis. But you do need a diagnosis to be prescribed ADHD medication. And I like that you mentioned, Nikki, that people are at different phases and stages, and medication is not something like you do it once and it's fixed and it's set. It is something that actually needs to be checked in with and readjusted, even if you are an adult and not going through what we consider sort of some growth and development and brain changes, because your needs for medication and how you're using medication, or how you want the medication to work for you, changes depending on what the changes you're making in your life. Yeah.
What is it when you look at the decision around moving forward with medication? Is there a sort of a bar, sort of emotional or behavioral bar when maybe you should be thinking about medication? versus just, therapy and coaching and accommodations.
Yeah.
What's your usual guidance there?
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting. Some people, I think the emotional bar is sort of like, I've tried everything else and I need something to be different. Yeah. There's that place where a lot of people are diagnosed and they may not want to step right into medication, like you mentioned. They may want to try coaching or therapy, or I mentioned on another podcast, we just sort of go to the internet to find the answers. And I typically find that medication is even though it's the first thing that is recommended by medical doctors, because that's what they have to treat medication with, that's their tool, that individuals tend to look for other alternatives rather than medication. But those that go to medication right away, or those that choose to try medication later, it typically is when other things that they've been trying are not working for them. And it's kind of sad that it feels like it's sort of a last resort type of a choice, but that's okay. I think we all need to go through a process where we feel comfortable and feel like we're at that point where, okay, this is the decision I want to make.
Well, and this was the sort of thought process too that I know we've been through in my own family, which is like you try so many things. And then you step back and think, gosh, I need something that is going to allow me and my brain to open the door for additional change. Maybe I'm not going to be on medication forever, but if I can start with a med that will help me to stop and think about the habits that I need to develop and think about the ways I need to change, maybe this is the thing that's going to help do that.
And I like how you describe that, because that is really, I think, the difference that medication can make, and several things you brought up there, Pete. One is that just because you take ADHD medication or starting to take ADHD medication doesn't mean you're going to have to take this medication for the rest of your life. Right. For whatever reason, ADHD medication is one of those things that we can start and stop. And I like to think of it as a tool that we can use. And we use it in a very particular way, and it's a very particular tool, and it needs to be it has to be the right tool to be used. So yeah, it's used in different ways over different times. And a lot of people are trying to create new habits, or trying to create some focus to be able to create new habits. And medication can help so much with those types of things. It can just sort of help you get over that hump, so you can start to experience, even small successes and changes, which then are motivating and can keep you going. But yeah, I like how you mentioned that. There's many ways to look at medication. It's not just take it and go along life as you've been normally doing it. It's really to take the medication and really, I think what I encourage my clients to do is to use the medication as a tool to help them accomplish these other things that they want. And then after a certain length of time, you can actually try what happens if I stop taking the medication. What changes for me? Am I still able to stick with those changes or those habits that I have been able to create and focus on and plan and organize, which might have been difficult for me before without medication. And what I find over and over again is that for many people, once they've sort of combined the puzzle piece of medication and also some of the other modalities, whether it be therapy or coaching or some other type of modalities, that eventually it's like it does become a habit and it can actually decrease their medication.
So what are some of the common fears or concerns that you have seen with people starting medication? Like, what stops them from wanting to start it?
Great question. So much fear involved in taking medication, because there still perpetuates this myth or misunderstanding about what the main type of or category of medication that is used to treat ADHD, which is stimulants. And there's a huge misunderstanding about what stimulants do, what they are. And it still persists consistently today. And so the biggest fears are that I'm going to be taking something that I'm going to become addicted to, that is a drug that is unhealthy for me. And I really, if I could probably do some sort of a poster or a billboard or something, it would be stimulant medications activate your dopamine receptors so you can create more dopamine and activate your executive function in ADHD. They do not stimulate your body. They stimulate the dopamine receptors. And if we, of course, understand that ADHD is really primarily a deficit of dopamine, it makes a lot of sense. And I wish with all my might that forefathers or whoever those scientists were that created that medication years ago had called it something else. But little did they know that it was going to then be wrapped around some of the ways that illegal drugs and other substances have been sort of created and used, abused throughout history. And it's never quite been separated from that. And the medication has nothing to do with that. Just a huge misunderstanding. I think it doesn't help that, unfortunately, a lot of prescribers aren't able to explain that to clients. And so they may go in there and talk about stimulants, and it's almost I can just see a client sort of like fear, like this red fear go down, like, oh my gosh, we're not talking about stimulants. And I'm not sure the prescribers have a way of actually explaining it to them that feels comfortable, that feels like they have some confidence in it. I think that's the other thing that I hear from a lot of clients is that for whatever reason, there's not a lot of people out there that are really well versed in ADHD medications. And a lot of clients will report that they feel like their prescriber is asking them what they want to take, which is kind of an awkward position for them to be in. But I think mostly it's just a misunderstanding and misinformation. And it's why I do some of the classes that I do. I do a full class on teaching about ADHD medication. It's actually a 5-week class that's an hour and a half each week that covers medication and how it works, because I recognize that people are not getting that information. And I don't know if you find this, Nikki, when you're working with clients too, that once you provide that information to them in a very non-threatening way, just a very matter-of-fact way, I think when they have that, they understand what actually the medication does, they feel more comfortable and are more at choice. And I think that's sort of a big concern for them. So I think it's just fear of misunderstanding, fear that they're going to become addicted to that. And I sort of counter that with something that I have found that for most people who take ADHD medications, part of my coaching is actually spent trying to help them remember to take their medication, creating systems to help them take their medication. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of the anti-behavior of an addict. Right? Yeah. Someone who's addicted to something doesn't forget to take it the next time. And that is so common with this medication. Does it help people function better? Absolutely. But that's no different than when we put on a pair of glasses. Do we become addicted to the fact that this lens sort of helps us focus? No, we just know that it helps us perform better. And for whatever reason, wearing glasses and correcting our vision is not a problem, but it's really the same thing that's happening with the medication. It's just, but people may not understand that particular type of analogy.
That gets into a misnomer I think I've heard in the past, which is that ADHD meds somehow build up in your system. Can you debunk that for us real quick?
Well, I guess debunk it is like, no, they don't. Might you have to adjust the dose? Absolutely. There's all sorts of things that go into making sure you have the right dose of ADHD medication. And it's not just about it, and it's why that you need to sort of revisit the medication to see if it's working. So I think there's sort of this myth that when you start out, oftentimes when people take their first dose of a ADHD medication, which by the way is actually sort of the gold standard of knowing, do I have ADHD or not? The doctor can listen to your history, listen to your symptoms, listen to all of that. But when you take a stimulant medication, and if you have a positive response to it, meaning that things feel clearer, you're able to concentrate, sort of the static dies down, that is actually confirmation of the diagnosis. I think that's the other thing a lot of people, I want to say, and I might have you ask your question again, Pete, but another misunderstanding is that I find I talk with a lot of people who don't realize that they actually have been diagnosed with ADHD and they're taking medication, ADHD medication, and you cannot be prescribed ADHD medication by a prescriber without having a diagnosis. It's not something that's possible. They have to have a diagnosis there to be able to prescribe that medication. But it's fascinating to me how many people don't realize that for some reason there was a miscommunication between them and their prescriber, that they've actually been diagnosed.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. I'm fascinated by that. So I wanted to make that point because that's something that people may not realize. Ask your question again, Pete. I apologize. My head went totally to that little bit.
No,
there.
I'm glad you did. I know with our experience with ADHD in the family that, and the thing that we struggle with, and I'm talking about my kids at this point. My daughter would come home and she's like, "Gosh, it just has stopped working right at the end of the day." Like, and this is the same thing our physician said. We gotta watch this. We've got to watch how it works on you because it does sort of disappear from your system throughout the course of the day. It'll work. She's very effective in the morning, but by the time 3-4 o'clock rolls around, she's fully symptomatic again, and so that's a thing that I just wanted to get your thoughts on.
Absolutely, this is bringing up another great piece that I find is sometimes overlooked or not addressed when the medications are prescribed, and it is being able, and it's part of the fine tuning there, Pete, that you're talking about. And when I'm working with people, I'm very specific about questions that I ask, and your listeners can ask themselves these questions as well. But when you take the medication, to be noting that, note when you start to experience when does it kick in for you? Mm-hmm. So and everybody, it's going to be different. And I think from what I find from the prescriber standpoint is that they sort of look at the medical book and say, okay, well, it lasts 10 hours, so I'm going to give you this, and it's supposed to last 10 hours. And the fact is that each person metabolizes the medication differently. So in order to be able to fine tune your medication so it works right for you when you need it, note when you take the medication and take it consistently at the same time. Also note when it seems to kick in. You may not be something some people are noticing, but once you put your attention on it, you probably will. So note that, because that's an important time. For instance, like with your daughter, if she's taking it at 7 o'clock in the morning and school starts at 7:30, but it doesn't kick in to 8 o'clock, there may be a really precious half hour in there that she's missing part of the day, and she may want to take it earlier so that it's fully effective when she, hits the books or sits down at the desk or whatever in the morning.
And conversely, the thing we ran into was that some of her most important classes were at the very end of the day.
Absolutely.
So she actually had to stall taking it until she knew it would still be effective by the time she needed it.
And that's the other sort of parameter. When does the medication start to wear off? And again, it's not something, some people won't notice it. As parents, what we tend to notice is that, and it's not uncommon for people to feel a little bit, sort of the opposite of what they felt when they were on the medication. They might feel a little anxious. They might feel a little agitated. A lot of kids, I noticed when my son was younger, it was when I would hear the cupboards in the kitchen go open and close, right? All of a sudden his appetite was coming back. And unfortunately, for a lot of students, that is either right before school's out or right when school is out, when there's a lot of stimulation. They're having to remember their homework. They're having to write it down. They're having to get home. There might be after school things that are going on, and it can be pretty overwhelming for them. If you know those parameters, like you're saying with your daughter, you can either adjust when she takes it. For instance, her first classes might be PE or band or something like that, where she's naturally engages in those, and she doesn't need the medication to help her hold her attention or focus on that. And maybe her more significant classes like math and English or something at the end of the day, where it really benefits her to have the medication fully active in her system. But I think with kids especially, and if it's like for your daughter, if it's wearing off about that time, our kids are really, they sort of live a life where it's not just 8 hours. They are doing homework, they're doing other things that extend into the evening. And I think for a lot of families and a lot of students, they may not, again, be getting benefit from medication because it is wearing off. And doing homework is one of the most difficult things for most kids with ADHD. It's not interesting. It's not exciting. And a lot of people may not realize that you can take a smaller dose or even a shorter acting dose of your medication towards the end of the day that what I call dovetails into that time period so that you can get the benefit of the medication, but then it's worn off by the time you go to sleep, which actually sort of goes back to one of your questions, one of the biggest fears, what I noticed is that most physicians or prescribers, when they're sending their clients off, and what I hear is that watch how much you're eating and if you're sleeping or not. And by monitoring when you take the medication and when it wears off, I really think it helps people to recognize whether or not that medication is still active in their system at bedtime. For most people actually who are on the right dose of the medication, the right timing, the right type of medication, they are actually sleeping better than they ever had. And it brings up the point also that typically, especially with children, until they've been diagnosed, we're not really paying attention to how they're sleeping, especially if they're the type of sleeper that just sits in their room and sort of, twiddles their thumb, basically, which was what my son would do. He didn't get out of bed. I didn't know he wasn't sleeping, but yet when I would make his bed or change his bed, and he shared a bunk bed with his brother, I'd look up and there would be all sorts of little things picked at and wallpaper peeled off. And I'm like, this kid is not sleeping at night. But yet he wouldn't get out of bed. And I know some kids do, and that's how parents know they're not sleeping. But ironically, when we start asking kids, okay, well, how are you sleeping? Because that's what we remember the doctors asked us. And the kids might say, I'm not sleeping well. Well, they've never been sleeping well. We just never asked them. Monitoring the medications in this way, or knowing when the medication wears off, I think gives a lot of parents and also individuals a little bit of confidence that, okay, it's not going to interfere with my sleep, so to speak.
Something that I keep going back to is when at the very beginning of our conversation, you guys were talking about, this doesn't have to be something that you do forever, that you might be able to take the dosage down or change the dosage. But my question then is still, if you feel like this is a tool that's working for you, it's okay though for you to take this medication for the rest of your life. Like there isn't anything bad about that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. When we're treating anything, typically, and ADHD is sort of unique in this way, where it's a treatment that you can take and not take, because the medication is more of a tool. For some people, like you're saying, if you, or I use the analogy, for instance, of eyeglasses, we wouldn't necessarily expect, unless there was some other treatment, for someone to stop wearing glasses. And there's certain times, for instance, that you want to wear, like for me, I have to wear, bifocals, and I take them off and on depending on when I need them. ADHD medication, some people will use it the rest of their life every day, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's no harmful effects from that. In fact, we find that people that take it consistently every day actually do better. And it's not just young kids. And I think that's another fear, is that we fear that maybe we're going, like we've talked about, the kids are going to become addicted. But we've actually realized that kids that are treated with ADHD medication, where they're actually experiencing that positive benefit from it, are much, much less likely to start experimenting with other substances later on. So I don't think that there's a right way or wrong way to do this. What I really want to reinforce to people is that it's a tool that works for you. Sometimes it's a tool you're going to want to use every day. Like people put glasses on every day. That's just what they do. For other people, maybe they just need to put their bifocals on when they're doing a particular type of task, and that helps them. It's unique in the ability to be able to use it for each person in whatever way works for them. That's not very common with other types of medications, or certainly other types of mental health disorders, which is what this is. Even though I don't like to say that, that's what it is. Most other types of disorders in our body, we have to take something that's consistent. But ADHD medication, we really can use it as a tool. And for some people, that's an everyday thing, no problem. And other people, it's using it maybe once a week for a particular task. For some people, it's using it in the morning because that's when the tough time is for them to be able to organize their day. It's very, very unique. And I think that also makes people feel much more comfortable with it, knowing that they can personalize this to what works for them. I think that we really undervalue being in control with ADHD. And I think knowing that we have that sense of control, or we can have that sense of control over the medication and how it works for us and how we want it to work, is really reassuring for a lot of folks.
Well, we will definitely put in the show notes your class. Do you offer that periodically, or how does that work?
I actually offer that usually once a year. In May or so, I offer it. I do have it recorded, so people can still get the class recorded, but I do offer it live every year. I think in May, I offer it on a month that actually has 5 Mondays. I know that's random, but that's how I do it.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Because people are like, oh, okay, I can totally commit, 5 Mondays, but if I spread it over 2 months, it seems somehow it seems so much longer. But
yes, absolutely.
It's a really great class, and it's full of everything from how your brain works to what's going on in the synapses. And so that when we start talking about what the medications do, which is especially the stimulants, what is it that they're actually doing? And I've even had 10-year-olds on the class who have started taking medications, and they have written me and said, oh my gosh, Coach Laurie, it's great. I understand now what a medication does, right? So it's really rewarding.
What a great service too, because people need to have that information. It's not out there. And so
it is not out there. And I wish it was. I so wish it was. And I know it's not. And that's why I do it.
Another piece of this puzzle that I want to talk about is therapy and coaching. Yeah. I talk a lot about coaching throughout the podcast episodes. I'll talk about what I do and give lots of different examples. I'm so happy to have another ADHD coach from your perspective talk about what you do, and also the differences between therapy and coaching, because I think that's still unclear to some people. So let's start with that.
Yeah, boy, we could do a whole podcast on this, right, Nikki?
Totally.
So again, love the question, and I love that it actually is included in part of the treatment. Right? We know what we call in our community sort of a multimodal treatment where medication can really help, but it's not going to be enough because it's not going to teach you certain skills or ways of doing things, which is oftentimes what's happened with people with ADHD. They're having to sort of relearn how to do certain things, or having to learn for the first time, for instance, what actually planning is, that kind of thing, those kinds of skills, because their brain has been very preoccupied, maybe up until being diagnosed, with other things. That's how I like to put it. So it really is coaching or therapy comes in there as an additional way to help people, I think, learn these particular skills, or even manage other obstacles that they have. People who have been struggling with ADHD, and the older they are, I think the more impact that has had on them. We oftentimes have created a lot of things in our own head, or have maybe created things in our environment that are not working for us, right? That sort of thing. So wanting to sort through that, even the diagnosis of ADHD, I really think it's not as, when people are diagnosed, I think I heard you on another podcast talking about sort of the emotions that happen after that. There's a lot of emotions involved with that. And I don't know if you find this, Nikki, but the older somebody is, or the longer they've gone being undiagnosed, the more potential emotional sort of response they have to that, which is perfectly natural, right? But there can be a lot of things that come up for people, misunderstanding, anger, guilt. Why wasn't I diagnosed earlier? What could I have done if I had known? So those are definitely great questions, either for a coach or a therapist, and what somebody chooses, I think, is really a sort of a personal choice. I think the difference between, and again, I'd love to know your feedback on this as well, if there's something to add to it, is that the therapeutic model tends to go back to the origin of the origin of the wound, is how I look at that, and want to sort of heal that or solve that, and has a perspective that needs to be healed or solved in order for the person to move forward, to be able to move forward in their life, or to be whole, or to be productive. And coaching really takes a very different approach with this. It's one of the reasons why I went from the therapeutic model to coaching model when I discovered it, is because sometimes you can't always fix exactly everything, right? If you break a bone, you're going to have a break in your bone. It may heal, but there's always going to be that scar there. But that doesn't mean you can't get up and walk and improve your mobility or your activity from a physical standpoint. And I think that there's a bit of that in coaching, where and I don't know if you hear this, I hear it a lot, where people have been struggling so much with the challenges of the ADHD that when they're diagnosed, they want to just move forward. And they are so ready to do that. And it's with the understanding that there may be some old, I don't want to say wounds, but old emotions and old feelings, which are natural to have. That's normal to have those, but it doesn't mean it has to keep them from moving forward or creating the changes in their life that they want to. So I think that's one of the differences. I think therapy sort of goes back to the wound and has a perspective of needing to heal that in order for somebody to move forward. And coaching sort of takes the person where they are. And if our clients are saying, you know what, I know this goes way back for me and it's impacted me in many, many ways, but I want to move forward. We as coaches trust that the client has a sense of who they are and will move forward with them. So we don't need to necessarily go back. Although certainly dealing with emotions is not something we don't do as coaches. We do. The other thing that I think makes a difference, and I don't know if you and Pete know that I'm actually have my own training program now. So I've just been talking with the students about this particular aspect, the difference between therapy and coaching, mostly because people are going to want to know, sort of like you're asking me now. Mm-hmm. There's also, I think, one of the biggest differences, I think, in coaching and therapy is that as a coach, we call it partnering with the client. What that really means is that we bring as coaches an expertise in understanding the challenges and obstacles that somebody experiences with ADHD, what's happening in general with people with ADHD. And that's our expertise. Our expertise is not in what the client should do, what works for them, what solutions they should try. We don't approach it from that. What we recognize is that the client is an expert in who they are, and the role of the coach, we bring our expertise of understanding the ADHD. They bring their expertise in who they are. They're the only ones that really know what goes on exactly in their life. And we bring that together to help the client discover their own solutions, which we trust as coaches are there. They just have maybe not realized that they're there. There's sort of that piece of it. So I think this partnering where we are not necessarily coming as an expert and telling clients what to do is very different than, again, a therapeutic model where there's much more perhaps suggestions on try this, try that. We need to heal this wound. We need to, in order to move forward. What do you think about that, Nikki?
Well, I think very much the same way. The way that I explain it is I'll tell people that coaching is more of a hands-on approach than therapy. We have a lot of contact. I have a lot of contact with my clients in between sessions with text messages and emails, and you don't typically have that with therapists. Definitely a forward approach. I totally agree with you. It's not that you take the emotions out of coaching because they're there. I mean, they're absolutely there. So what I tell clients is that I'm listening for those limiting beliefs and I'm listening for those things that might be stopping them that they're not aware of and bringing that to their attention so they can see that. And I like the way that you say partnering, because that's very much what we do is I may give an idea or a strategy, but I always tell them, go into it with a mindset of curiosity and practice and tweak it and do what you need to make it your own and not be tied to the outcome because it can look different for anybody. There's just no right or wrong way to do something. And I find too that, and this may just be like recently, I don't know why, but you know how it's just weird how the universe works. And sometimes your clients will have a similar issue that they're all dealing with. I don't know why that happens, but there's this acceptance that I'm dealing with a lot of my clients right now of accepting ADHD as it is and not feeling like you should be doing something because somebody else is doing it and comparing yourself to other people, but really giving them the education, like you said, the expertise of this is your brain. This is how you're going to naturally think. And that's okay. You don't, Pete said this before too. You don't have to fit into somebody else's normal. So there is a lot of education piece to that. Where I tend to draw the line with my clients when I say, okay, this is the time that you probably need to see a therapist, is if I start to see the depression and anxiety are getting to a point where it's so impacting their life that they can't move forward, then, I will definitely say this is something you need to talk to a therapist about. I'm also personally not very comfortable with talking about relationships. And so what I'll do is I'll talk about it to an extent, and then I will let the client know, this is probably better for you to go talk to a marriage therapist, or I'll recommend them to see Melissa Orlove's book, because that's just me personally. It's like I can touch on it to an extent. So I think it's per coach too, because you will talk a lot about medication and I don't. Like that's not something that I talk a lot about either. So I think it's kind of per coach as well as per ADHD client.
Yeah, I think that's where sort of the partnership piece comes in, is that it's each coach there is a different fit for each person and the strengths of the coach. And we do tend to attract, I think, clients that are either very similar to us or going through something similar. I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, we could have a whole nother discussion about that, but it's sometimes uncanny, right? How that happens.
Yes.
Yeah. And I do like the distinction that you made. And I just want to sort of underscore that. I always tell the students when I'm training them that coaches are never to work with somebody that they're uncomfortable with. And each coach, my background brings with me a different set of strengths, a different set of experiences and expertise that expands some of the areas that I'm comfortable working with. However, coaches are trained to be able to know what their limitations are, and just like you're doing, to be able to refer or to suggest another professional if they would be able to address another area better. I think there is that very important distinction that a coach is not for you if whatever it is that you're experiencing, what I sort of use as a clinically, like it is so incapacitating, as you mentioned, the anxiety, depression, is you cannot move forward. Then It is time to go and see a therapist, because with a coach, what you're going to be doing is actually taking those steps. And some people don't have the energy to do that. They really do need to spend time in therapy, healing some of those things. They are not areas that they can actually move forward with. They're so heavy or cumbersome for the person that they actually need to be looked at for a while before they can actually move forward with them. That's a really great distinction. And I like that you're making also the point that because coaching is a fairly new profession and a lot of people don't understand sort of how coaching works. I like the comparison that you do, that coaching is more than just really the therapy. We aren't just meeting with someone once a week. We're doing all sorts of other types of support or contact with our clients throughout our work together, which is, I think, very different. Another thing that I always want to make sure I'm putting out here, because I see that it's a very misunderstood concept. Just recently, I was reading an article and I was shocked to read that there was still this perception that coaching isn't regulated. It is a regulated profession. And whenever you're looking for a coach, we have a organization called the International Coach Federation that's been around for about 25 years. And it's the largest regulating body of coaches, and they set the ethical standards and competencies for what coaching is. Ask if your coach is credentialed, ask what their training is. Because it's a new profession, it hasn't sort of reached that place where there's a licensure, where people cannot say they're a coach unless they have reached this particular level. I truly believe we'll get there, just no different than the therapeutic profession has or the medical profession has. There was a time when therapists didn't have to take a licensing exam, or nursing certainly didn't have to do that years ago, not too many years ago, but we'll get there. But there is a regulating body. So know that when you're working with coaches, that ask about those things, because people can sometimes say they're a coach, but they may not have actually been through the type of rigorous training that is upheld to be the standard of coaching.
Let's pivot a bit to self-care. We've been talking about talking about these heavy things.
Yeah, let's lighten the mood a little bit. Yeah, self-care. Yeah. One of the things that I hope I want to bring up. So when it comes to self-care, I love this question because people ask me. We were talking about medication, super important. Coaching, super important for people who want to. And I love that sort of do things differently. I mean, coaching, we help someone understand how their brain works so that they go, oh my gosh, no wonder that wasn't working for me. I can do it this way. It totally works. Why not? Let me do it. Right. And then there's some other things that make huge differences. And I think in somebody's experience, I should say, with their ADHD, and it does fall into the self-care I'm thinking, Pete. One is sleep. I feel sometimes like I'm the sleep police. And I'm a big believer that if we didn't need sleep, we would have evolved out of it years ago. And if there's one thing I have my clients do, if they really want to experience an improvement in their brain style, and especially if they are deciding at the time not to do medications, they must sleep. They must sleep. And that is such a hard thing for a lot of ADHD clients to do, because our brains get really busy. We are up all night. Nighttime's a time when we can get a lot of things done because it's quiet. But when we don't get that sleep, even if we shift that an hour here or an hour there, it's basically like creating jet lag in our system. It impacts our ability to think, to concentrate, to focus. It is huge. So anything you can do to sleep, focus on that. It's going to make a huge difference. Do you find that, Nikki, or Pete, yourself?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, and as a coach, that those text messages, part of that is reminding them, are you working on your evening routine? How's that going? And that those little subtle reminders of how important that sleep is. In fact, I just texted somebody today because I was confirming our appointment this afternoon, and she said, she wrote back saying, I've only had 3 hours of sleep. I'm kind of wondering if I should take a nap. And then first thing I said is, your sleep is most important. We can reschedule.
Yeah.
I tend to forget too that for living with ADHD, one of the things that's so difficult is making transitions. It's hard to make transitions.
Yes.
That includes going from wake to sleep, or in particular, sleep to wake. That is just another transition that you have to deal with. And it's hard to do. It takes practice. It takes attention. It takes, thinking about caffeine. It takes thinking about sugar. It takes thinking about all these things to make transitions smooth.
Yes. I remember sleep is probably the second biggest thing that I talk about with clients. And it's fascinating to me because I love sleep, and it's very frustrating to me when I can't get any sleep. But I always interesting to me when people say sleep is boring for them with ADHD. It's truly boring. I think you're exactly right, Pete. It's about this transition from activity to sort of not doing anything. That can be difficult. So each person has something that's very different that might interfere with their sleep. And what I found, just sort of as a very, very practical approach, is to focus on what time you get up every day and make that absolutely consistent, because that is going to set the tone for the rest of your day, for the way that your body responds to food, when it responds to being thirsty, when it responds to elimination, all different kinds of things. So when I'm working with clients over the 15 years I've been doing this coaching, I've tried everything to try and help clients get into a regular sleep pattern. And I found that if they focus on getting up at the same time every day, and that includes the weekends, because a lot of our clients are sort of, I don't want to say cheating on the weekends, but that's when they might be just having these huge nap fests, right? And then they start Monday and can't figure out why things are all thrown off again. But when we're trying to create that consistency, which is so common to have the inconsistency in ADHD, for getting up at the same time, even though it may seem a little bit sinful to do that on the weekends. But if we can do that, we're going to set a rhythm in our body. Our body is naturally going to get tired. It's going to have to get tired because we need to sleep, but it's also going to then set up a cycle, a predictable cycle and a consistent cycle of taking medication, of when we're hungry, of when we're doing other things, which I think has all different kinds of benefits for our clients.
Well, and the number one benefit is, darn it, you feel better.
Right.
Once you get good at it, you feel better.
Yeah.
Like, that is the number one sort of reinforcing behavior.
That you feel
the
better?
Reward.
Yes.
A client just told me the other day that they have this app called Sleep Cycle. And the way that it's helped him is it monitors what type of sleep you're in and will tell you when is the right time for you to wake up so you're not so groggy.
Wow.
And so I haven't checked it out, but I definitely think it's worth it, because he said for him, he actually had to get up earlier, but he got up earlier and felt better and didn't feel so groggy because he was waking up at the right time.
Right. Yeah, our body goes through different sleep cycles, and there's certain deep sleep. If we're waking up at that time, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so check that out, Sleep Cycle.
Thank you.
Okay, Pete,
Got
now
it.
we can talk about...
Well, now I want to talk about vitamin D, but I do want to mention, since you brought up an app, there are a number of apps that allow you to do this, and the better ones actually have motion detectors that are built into them. Sleep Cycle actually uses your phone's accelerometer, but one of the things you can tell when investment in this is reaching sort of a fever pitch, because Apple just bought a company that develops devices that help you track and maintain better sleep, and so we're going to be seeing more of these kinds of devices. So look for the ones, you put them under your mattress, under your pillow, and they will help you really monitor your sleep.
I think sleep is one of those mysteries of our lives, and the rest of the animal kingdom, where there's obviously we can talk about the benefits of it, but I think that we don't really fully understand the full benefits of it. And if Apple's investing in it, I mean that's every stamp of approval I need.
Something. That's right.
Yeah.
So
go buy your stock.
Right. So you wrote a blog post about the importance of vitamin D in ADHD. Let's talk about that.
Well, yeah, I would happy to go into it. And I know we had a little talk before we got on the call, and it's something that sounds like you've had experience with. So I want to hear about your experience as well, Pete. But I was I've lived in about 15 years in sunny climates. I lived overseas in Australia for a few years and then moved down to the middle of California in Sacramento. And I was really feeling low mood, low energy, and thinking it was just the fact that I was, starting a new business. I had 4 kids, all that kind of stuff. And I would go in and my doctor would, take the blood tests and say, oh, your vitamin D is low. And I'm like, what? I live in California. I don't even have to be in the sun to be in the sun. And when I started, and then apparently got super, super low. And I think just because I'm kind of embarrassed to say, just desperate. I said, okay, fine, I'll take it. And I was at that point of needing to take something prescription. But the difference it made was incredible in my energy, in my mood. And I'm looking at this, and, I'm a medical and mental health professional. So I was a little bit embarrassed not to really understand this, but I was a little bit comforted by the fact that the vitamin D is something that we're just finding out even more about in the medical community. And it's not, I think I was saying to you, Pete, earlier, it's not just like replacing or taking vitamin B. Vitamin D, we call it a vitamin, but really is a precursor to hormones, which activate all sorts of different systems in your body. And it's incredible how frequently clients with ADHD have low vitamin D levels. I don't know what the correlation is, but one of the things when I'm starting to work with clients, especially if they are exhibiting some of those symptoms, is I have them actually go make sure that get their blood level checked and ask them to make sure that their vitamin D level are normal. And I would say 25 to 50% have lower vitamin D levels, and just taking a supplement is amazing for them. So that's sort of my experience. And I realized once I wrote that blog, this was several years ago, that so many other people are going, oh my goodness, I just realized that myself. So I don't know what it is, but please, even if you're not experiencing sort of fatigue or low mood, is make sure when you go get your physical that you have your vitamin D level checked. Your physician may or may not do it. I don't think everybody does it, but wow. So tell me, Pete, what happened to you?
Well, no, it was, you just described it. I went in to work with my naturopath, and she said, we're going to run some tests after listening to, what I was describing, which was, issues with mood and focus and sleep and all kinds of things. And she said, let's start and just make sure we check your vitamin D levels, in addition to all sorts of other things. And she came back to me, and her language, I think, was very telling. And of course, I live in Portland, Oregon, which is a pretty gray place, right? I mean, it's not naturally conducive to great vitamin D levels. And she said, I think I would describe your vitamin D level as, quote, catastrophically low. And that's pretty telling. I mean, that's kind of a loaded word, but she put me on a mega dose for 90 days of vitamin D to get those levels back up, and the difference was stunning in my mood, my sleep, my behavior, my temper, my sort of short fuse syndrome. I mean, everything was impacted by this. And again, as we were talking about with medication, this allowed me to sort of open the door to making additional change in diet and just healthy living. Right? So it's a big deal.
I want to stress, right? I'm living in Seattle now. You're living in Portland. We all know, about we would expect low vitamin D levels, but I really want to reinforce that you can be living in sunny California, you can living in places where sun is abundant, and that isn't going to necessarily mean that you have adequate vitamin D levels. And that was sort of what I was sort of in my mind thinking, what I understood about vitamin D, you get it in the sun and that all that kind of stuff, but that's not true. So even, living in Portland, Seattle, I think we're probably going, I'm going to go get my vitamin D levels because there's not a lot of sun. It would make sense. But even in sunny climates, won't necessarily mean that your vitamin D levels are going to be adequate. And the difference, I think I also had catastrophically low vitamin D levels, replacing that is amazing. And once you get it up to a certain level, you can just take over the counter or something like that, supplements, but
much easier to maintain. Yeah. Well, and I should say, I put the link to your wonderful blog post in the show notes. So swipe over the show notes and you'll see this link. And it's the vitamin D. Is sunshine enough? Vitamin D and ADHD. And there's a section in there that's actually called How to Get Your Vitamin D Levels Tested. You should read that before you go to your next checkup, because that'll tell you what to say to you.
I mean, we think about with ADHD, we think about making sure we have our thyroid checked. Certainly with women in anywhere between like 35 and 80, I make sure that they are having their hormones checked, because I think that's something maybe a lot of people don't realize. When our estrogen dips, our medication works differently, because estrogen is sort of like binds our dopamine to our receptors. So it's why a lot of women in their going through the menopause time of their life will oftentimes be diagnosed with ADHD. So that's another sort of key factor of things to get checked that people may not even think about doing. So vitamin D, thyroid, and blood levels too, because we can oftentimes not have energy because of anemia, but also hormones.
I have a question, because I'm low on vitamin D too, and I live in Eugene, Oregon. But I agree, it doesn't matter where you live, you should get it checked. But my doctor had recommended that I take vitamin D and fish oil together. What's the reason for that? Is there a reason for that? I don't know.
I think
have you ever heard of that?
I haven't necessarily heard of. There's necessarily a connection between the vitamin D and fish oil. My fingers are itching now to go on Google and find out what that is. But I'm thinking fish oil is one of those. The vitamin E is also one of those things that we're realizing that there's something about that is helpful in a lot of different ways. So he may have been just suggesting the vitamin E for some other reason. I really don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's a connection between.
So maybe there wasn't a connection. That was just what they recommended. Yeah. Okay. I'll have to look into that myself.
But it does bring up sort of, we were talking a little bit about other, self-care, other things you can do, and things like vitamin E, fish oil we're finding can be just, it's not going to hurt, and it may even help. For some people, it makes a huge difference. Vitamin E has a very different way of working than, it doesn't work like the stimulant medications. But for some reason, it really seems to help people, and it's not going to hurt to take it. So I think that's one of those sort of, wonder supplements that people are adding to their routine because it couldn't hurt to do that.
Right. And if it makes them feel better, I mean, then, hey, go for it.
Yeah. There's a few other, vitamins that people always ask me about. What should they be looking for? And one of the things that I always want to make sure that I think we want to make sure that if we are taking medication and we're adding some of these other supplements to it, that we are very, very clear with our prescriber that we're doing so. I think there's can be a misunderstanding that when we are adding some of these quote unquote natural supplements to medication, that it's not going to interfere. And the fact is they could. So I really encourage people, if you're using multiple types of treatment modalities, to make sure that whoever is sort of overseeing your particular care or treatment, that they are aware of the different types of alternative treatments or medications that you're taking. I think anything that we put in our mouth, right, let's face it, we're hoping for some sort of result. So that includes vitamin D, that includes fish oil, but other things that people that we read about consistently wanting to make sure that we have adequate levels of are things like magnesium and iron and zinc, along with the omega-3s. And people say, well, what dose? And it's one of those things that you can either research it or you can look on the bottle what it is. But just know that when you're combining those things, it's not, they work, they do combine in your body, and make sure that your medical provider knows, whichever way you're going with that, knows about all of the different approaches that you're using, so that they can help you coordinate that.
Which is why they ask you at the beginning of every appointment, is this medication list up to date? Do you need to add anything?
They're serious about that. There's a reason. Yeah.
We were talking a little, there's something else I was going to say where, I actually have I wrote a blog article about the natural treatments of ADHD, because a lot of people are really interested in that. And for me, natural isn't necessarily anything. Something natural isn't what comes out of a bottle. I just have this sort of thing about that. But there are a lot of things that people can be doing that really, really improve their ADHD. You were in the middle of like ADHD Awareness Month, and you are promoting the conference that's coming. Being around other people with ADHD is a healing force. Right? Because we can isolate ourselves. So I call it one of the natural treatments of ADHD. And it honestly, you don't have to look very far to find somebody else with ADHD. I think we just sort of attract them, or like magnets to other people. But be with other people. Know that you are not alone. If you can attend something like a conference or listen to the podcast, know that being with other people that are, and not even struggling the same way you are, but also experiencing the same success that you are and have the same experience, is so, so, so helpful, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. We talked about sleep. Yeah. The other one is sense of humor. Oh my gosh, right? Is that, that to me is like a natural treatment of and people with ADHD have great sense of humor, pretty much overall, right? We're bright, intelligent, witty people, and make sure you're nurturing that sense of humor. It's magic, I think.
Oh, I like that advice the best.
Well, or even just it's okay to laugh at yourself. Sometimes we do some pretty wacky things, right? And we're just like shaking our head like, well, there we go again.
I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. No, you don't.
About. I actually wrote another blog that's called My ADHD Slip is Showing, right? It's like when we when we slip up. right? And it's like, oops, there it goes again. And does anybody else see that? But right, it's true. And if we're not laughing at and it's not laughing at yourself to make light of it, because the challenges with ADHD can be very significant. I don't mean that at all, but it does mean that I noticed that when we're allowed to be able to look at it from another perspective, that it can make all the difference. So, and I do think having a sense of humor and being around other people with ADHD is so healing.
What a great note to end. Thank you so much, Laurie. This was so informative. I appreciate you so much taking the time to be on our show. I hope you come back and we don't wait 2 years.
I just need an invitation, right? That's all I need. And I'm like always there. But it's a pleasure to be.
Well,
and congratulations on your success. 2 years. That's amazing.
Well, we've been doing the podcast for a long time. It was the interviewing that started 2 years ago with you. You were our very first interview.
Oh.
Yeah, we'd already done 238 episodes before we even hit you. This episode is 316 of this show.
Gosh. Isn't that crazy?
It is.
Thank you for being a part of it. And thank you, everybody, for downloading and listening to this show. We sure appreciate it. And again, check us out on patreon.com/the ADHD podcast if you want more great interviews with people like Laurie Dupar. Now, Laurie, where would you like people to go find you? Now, the blog post I found was still at coachingforadhd.com. Is that still where you want to send people?
Well, I have just started to put everything under one. I have my private clients and I have my coaching school that I do now. But if they go to lauriedupar.com, they will land in the center of Laurieville.
With all of the things. Yes, that makes sense.
So I've tried to make it as easy as possible. I just did that fairly recently rather than giving out 3 or 4 different URLs, which is kind of silly. But we have it all now under, if people Google lauriedupar.com or go to lauriedupar.com, it will take you to, I think it takes you to my coaching website, but then you'll find information about all this, my blogs and download my ebook and all sorts of different things from that site.
That is perfect. Excellent. Well, we've got those in the show notes, and definitely check those out, everybody. It's great resources from Laurie and a great way to celebrate ADHD Awareness Month. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, again, for downloading and listening. On behalf of the great Laurie Dupar and Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright, and we will catch you next time right here on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.